Eleanor Price had always loved museums, but the night she agreed to catalog artifacts in the city's Forgotten History Wing, she realized this museum wasn't built to preserve the past, it was built to trap it, and some things inside had never stopped moving. The first time I stepped into the museum, I felt an instant chill crawl across my skin, though the air was not cold. It was a strange kind of weight that settled around me, as if the entire building exhaled and pulled me into its lungs. I had visited museums before, but this place felt different. It wasn't just the silence, it was how the silence pressed against my ears, until I could hear nothing but the faint sound of my own breathing and the dull thud of my heartbeat. The lobby stretched endlessly, lit by dim yellow lights that made the marble floors gleam like wet stone. Each step I took echoed, yet the echoes felt delayed, as though the sound had to push through invisible walls before reaching me. I moved slowly, almost cautiously, scanning the artifacts around me. Glass cases lined the halls, filled with relics pulled from centuries long gone and ancient masks. Rusted weapons, statues eroded into hollow faces. I wanted to admire them, but I could never shake the sensation of being watched. My eyes kept flicking to the edges of the exhibits, the corners where shadows clung. I told myself it was normal, just my imagination reacting to the strange atmosphere, but my body refused to relax. The museum was quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Even in an empty space, there should have been some noise, the hum of air conditioning, the creak of old pipes, the murmur of footsteps from staff. Instead, there was nothing. It was as if the building existed in its own pocket of time, sealed off from the world outside. I noticed the giant clock mounted above the entrance, its hands ticking slowly, the sound unnervingly loud in the emptiness. Each tick reverberated like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I wandered deeper into the exhibits, feeling the walls close in. Statues of forgotten kings loomed over me, their stone eyes carved so carefully they seemed alive. I caught myself staring back into them, my reflection warped across the polished glass. My throat tightened when I realized the reflections didn't always move when I did. Sometimes, a shadow in the glass lagged behind or tilted its head slightly in the wrong direction. I tried to laugh it off, convincing myself it was the dim lighting, but the unease never left. At the far end of the hall, I reached an iron gate sealed shut with heavy chains. A faded sign hung loosely on one side, its letters half scratched away, but I could still make out the words, "Closed for renovation." Beyond the bars stretched a wing of the museum, swallowed in darkness. I stood there for longer than I should have, staring into that void. My eyes strained to find details through the blackness, and just when I thought there was nothing, I caught a flicker of movement. A shadow glided across the floor, tall and thin, too fast to be a trick of the light. My chest tightened as I pressed closer to the gate, my hands gripping the cold metal. I squinted hard, waiting for the shadow to reappear, but nothing stirred. I backed away, reminding myself I had no reason to be afraid. Still, the silence behind the locked gates felt heavier than the rest of the building, as if something inside was holding its breath, waiting for me to leave. The rest of the museum seemed to blur after that. I drifted past more exhibits, but my focus never strayed far from that locked wing. The longer I stayed, the more I felt a strange pull, like the darkness itself was tugging at my mind. It wasn't curiosity, it was compulsion. I kept turning back, scanning the hall, waiting for movement that never came. My skin tingled with the certainty that if I looked away for too long, something behind those gates would move closer, creeping toward me unseen. Eventually, I forced myself to the exit. My relief was immediate when the glass doors slid open and the sound of the outside world poured in. Traffic voices, the rush of wind. It felt jarring after the suffocating silence of the museum. I stepped outside quickly, taking deep breaths, trying to shake off the weight that clung to me. But even then, I couldn't resist one last look through the massive front windows. The building was dark inside, the exhibits barely visible under faint emergency lights. For a moment I thought the place was empty, and I almost laughed at myself for being so unnerved. But then I froze, my eyes locked on the closed wing, barely visible from where I stood. In the shadows, framed by the iron gate, was a figure, pale, motionless, tall. It stood completely still, its face turned toward me. The glass distorted its features, but I knew with absolute certainty that it was staring directly into my eyes. When I blinked, it was gone. But the reflection of the glass remained fogged with what looked like a single handprint pressed firmly against the inside. I returned to the museum the very next day, though I told myself it was only out of curiosity. Deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something about the place had hooked itself into me. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure I saw, standing in that locked wing. I replayed it in my mind all night, questioning if it was real or just a trick of my tired eyes. By morning, the image was still there, haunting me like an afterimage burned into my vision. I needed to see the museum again, to convince myself it had only been imagination. Walking through the entrance this time felt heavier, as if the building knew I had come back. The giant clock above the doors ticked louder than before, each sound striking like a hammer against my skull. I moved slowly through the exhibits, my shoes clicking softly against the floor, but something about the sound was off. It didn't echo the same way it had yesterday. It was as if the museum was swallowing the noise, muting it, refusing to let it travel too far. I passed rows of glass cases, filled with relics from civilizations that barely left a trace on history. There were small clay figurines, daggers encrusted with rust, and masks carved from bone. I stopped at one in particular. It was a mask unlike any I had seen before, its surface yellowed and cracked with age. The eye sockets were deep and hollow, cut in such a way that they seemed to swallow the light around them. I leaned closer, pressing my face toward the glass. That was when I noticed something strange. In the reflection of the glass, my face was there, pale under the dim lighting. But I wasn't alone. Behind my reflection, another face appeared, faint but undeniable. It was thin, expressionless, its skin almost translucent, with dark pits where eyes should have been. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I couldn't move. I jerked my head around, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the hallway was empty. The reflection lingered a second longer before fading, leaving me staring at my own pale, frightened face. My gaze dropped back to the mask itself, and that's when I noticed it. The mask was tilted slightly to the side, its position different than before. It was as if it had shifted to face me directly. I tried to remember if it had always been like that, but doubt gnawed at me. I stepped back, keeping my eyes on it. The longer I looked, the more I became convinced that the thing behind the glass was alive, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Suddenly, something else caught my eye. On the glass of the display, faint but visible, was the outline of a handprint. I raised my own hand, pressing it against the glass, and immediately noticed the size difference. This print was longer, stretched unnaturally, with fingers that seemed to drag downward like melted wax. My skin crawled as I realized the print was on the inside of the case. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, and forced myself to move on. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the mask was still watching me, its hollow sockets following wherever I went. The deeper I wandered into the museum, the more distorted the space felt. The halls seemed longer, the shadows thicker. My sense of direction slipped away, even though I had already walked these same rooms the day before. I passed the same exhibits multiple times, convinced the building was rearranging itself while I moved. There was no one else in sight, not staff, not security, not visitors, just me and the endless sound of that clock ticking somewhere far behind. Eventually I found myself back near the closed wing. The iron gates loomed in front of me again, chains still wrapped tightly around them. I swore I wouldn't go near it this time, but my feet betrayed me. I pressed close, peering through the bars. It was as dark as before, but my eyes adjusted just enough to make out the faint outlines of objects draped in cloth. Statues, crates, artifacts waiting to be displayed. Or at least, that's what I tried to convince myself. My chest tightened as I noticed a slow ripple in one of the sheets, as though something beneath it was shifting. I froze, my body rigid, waiting for it to stop. The sheet sagged and lifted ever so slightly, like it was being pulled from underneath. I couldn't breathe. And then, just as quickly, it went still again, hanging limp, lifeless, as if nothing had happened. I forced myself to back away, my steps clumsy and rushed. My mind screamed at me to leave, but my body moved too slowly, heavy like it was being dragged. I finally reached the main hall, and for a moment I felt relief. But then, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The massive clock above the entrance wasn't ticking anymore. Its hands were frozen at the exact time I had first walked in, and in the suffocating silence that followed, I heard it again, the faint scrape of something moving inside the locked wing, followed by a whisper so soft it felt like it had come from within my own head. It said only one thing: stay. By the third time I returned to the museum, I no longer pretended that it was just curiosity pulling me back. It was something else, something stronger, like invisible strings dragging me toward that place whether I wanted it or not. My nights had become unbearable. I couldn't sleep without seeing the pale face from the reflection or hearing that whispered command echo in my skull. The word stay replayed over and over until I gave in. I thought maybe if I returned, if I faced it, the images would leave me. But a part of me knew I was making a mistake long before I stepped through the doors again. The building felt different this time. Not just silent, but hollow, like an empty shell with nothing alive inside. The air smelled stale, dustier than before, and every breath I took felt heavier, like I was inhaling something that didn't want me there. My footsteps were faint, nearly absorbed by the floor, and even the giant clock above the entrance was silent, its hands frozen in the exact same position as when I last left. It felt less like I was walking into a museum and more like I was stepping into a trap. I tried to distract myself by moving through the exhibits. The relics seemed darker now, the glass around them smudged, as if someone or something had been touching them from the inside. I passed the mask again and noticed that it wasn't facing forward anymore. It was tilted downward, angled in such a way that the hollow sockets stared directly at the path I was walking. The foggy handprint was still there, faint but undeniable. My chest tightened, and I quickened my pace, refusing to look again. Every hallway seemed to twist into another, repeating itself until I was no longer sure if I was moving forward or in circles. The lighting flickered, and for brief moments the exhibits would vanish into complete darkness, only to reappear when the bulbs steadied. During one of these flickers, I thought I saw a tall shadow standing ahead of me, stretched unnaturally long against the wall. When the lights came back, there was nothing but an empty corridor. I should have left then. I should have turned back and forced myself to escape that suffocating labyrinth. But my body carried me forward, step by step, until I found myself standing before the iron gates of the closed wing again. The chain still bound them tightly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were looser than before. My hands trembled as I gripped the bars, pressing my forehead against the cold iron to peer inside. The white sheet still covered the objects in the darkness, but this time they looked less like exhibits and more like figures waiting in silence. Some appeared hunched, others tall and rigid, all standing as if frozen mid. My eyes strained to adjust, and that was when I saw it, one of the sheets moving, not with the stillness of air, but with intention. It lifted slightly, rising as though something beneath it was breathing, slow and deliberate. My chest constricted. The chain rattled under my grip, as if something from the other side had pulled back. I stumbled away from the gates, heart hammering against my ribs. The sound of the rattle echoed unnaturally loud, bouncing off the walls like a warning. I turned and bolted down the hall, trying to escape the pull of that wing, but the farther I ran, the quieter my footsteps became, until it felt like I was moving in silence. That was when I noticed the clock again. It had not resumed ticking, but I could hear it faintly behind me, each tick sharp and deliberate, though the hands had not moved an inch. The sound followed me through the corridors, chasing me no matter where I turned. It was inside my head, in my chest, like another heartbeat forcing itself to align with mine. I slowed down only when I thought I had reached the entrance. But instead of glass doors leading outside, I found another long hallway lined with portraits. Their painted faces watched me with unnatural sharpness, eyes glinting with something more than oil and canvas. I backed away, desperate to find another way out, but my shoulder brushed against cold glass. I turned and realized I was standing in front of another display case. Inside was nothing but a cracked mirror, its surface blackened with age. For a moment I thought it was harmless, just another artifact, but then my reflection blinked when I hadn't. My stomach dropped, and I stumbled back, my reflection's eyes lingering on me with something darker, hungrier. I ran then, not caring where I was going, just desperate to find the exit. My lungs burned and my vision blurred with panic. When I finally reached the lobby, I froze in my tracks. The glass doors were there, but beyond them was not the outside world. It was darkness, thick and endless, stretching further than I could see. My reflection stood in the glass again, but this time it wasn't mimicking me. It was smiling. And in the silence, louder than anything else, the whisper returned. This time it didn't say stay. It said, "You belong to us now." I didn't want to return again, but the museum never really left me. Every night, when I closed my eyes, I saw its endless corridors, the frozen clock, the pale reflection smiling from the glass. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, convinced I was still inside. By the fourth night, I realized I couldn't fight it anymore. The museum wasn't calling, MIT was dragging me back. And so I went, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. The city outside was alive with noise, but the moment I stepped through the museum doors, all sound collapsed into nothing. It was worse this time. The silence felt heavier, layered, as if countless things were listening from behind the walls. The air was stagnant, and even though the building was dimly lit, it felt darker than before. The clock above the entrance was still frozen, its hands locked in place like they had been waiting only for me. The main hall stretched out, but something about it was wrong. The exhibits looked older, dustier, as though years had passed instead of a single day. The air reeked faintly of damp stone, mold, and something sour beneath it, like rot hidden under the polished marble. I walked slowly, every step sinking me deeper into that suffocating stillness. I told myself I wouldn't go near the closed wing again, that I'd avoid whatever was lurking there. Instead, I took the staircase to the second floor, hoping distance would make me feel safer. But safety was impossible here. At the top of the stairs, a long corridor stretched before me, lined with portraits of curators, patrons, and figures tied to the museum's history. Their frames were gilded but tarnished with age, their painted surfaces cracked. At first they seemed ordinary stiff men and women immortalized in brushstrokes, their gazes distant and proud, but as I moved past them, I realized their eyes followed me. The effect was too precise, too deliberate. No matter where I stood, each pair of painted eyes locked onto mine. I quickened my pace, refusing to look directly at them, but a creeping dread gnawed at me. My skin prickled as if someone was walking inches behind me. Halfway down the corridor, I forced myself to glance back. My heart seized. The portraits were different. They weren't facing forward anymore. Every single one of them had shifted. Their heads turned ever so slightly toward me. The brushstrokes that once held stiff, lifeless expressions now showed faint smiles, as if they were pleased to see me walking among them. I stumbled forward, desperate to escape, but the hall seemed endless. My breaths came sharp and uneven, echoing back at me in strange distortions. It sounded less like breathing and more like whispers hidden beneath each inhale. The frames on either side creaked faintly, as if the painted figures were leaning closer. Finally, I reached the end of the corridor. My relief was short-lived. When I turned to look back, I froze in horror. Every portrait was different now. The painted men and women no longer wore smiles of approval. Their eyes were hollow, black pits smeared across the canvas, and their mouths were open, stretched wide as if screaming silently. My legs carried me down a side hall, away from them, but the sense of being watched never left. The shadows felt alive, tugging at the corners of my vision. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps matching my own. A half step behind, but when I stopped, the sound stopped too. I ended up in a smaller room, one I didn't remember seeing before. The lights inside were faint, flickering in sickly yellow tones. The walls were lined with glass cases holding strange relics, broken jewelry, fragments of statues, and more masks carved from bone. But in the center of the room stood something that froze me completely. It was a display case, taller than me, and inside was a mannequin dressed in rotting, antique clothing. Its head was tilted downward, but its hands pressed flat against the glass, long fingers splayed as though trying to push its way out. I inched closer, unable to stop myself, until I noticed something horrifying. The mannequin's chest was rising and falling in shallow breaths. Its head twitched slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if it was straining to look up at me. My own breath stuttered. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the thing inside the case. Just as I reached the doorway, the lights flickered and went out for less than a second. When they returned, the mannequin's head was tilted up, and its hollow eyes were staring directly into mine. I fled from the room, stumbling through the hallways with no clear direction, heart pounding like it would break through my ribs. Every step I took felt heavier, slower, like the museum was sinking me deeper into itself. I finally stopped in the middle of another dark corridor, gasping for air. The silence pressed against me again, unbearable. Then, from behind me, came the faint scrape of glass sliding against stone. I turned slowly, dread crawling up my spine. At the far end of the hall, the mannequin's display case now stood against the wall, empty, and the faint sound of footsteps began to echo softly in the dark. Coming closer, I knew I should have run and never looked back, but the museum no longer felt like a place I could escape. It was as if the building had closed around me, sealing me inside its endless corridors. My legs moved on their own, carrying me deeper, while my thoughts screamed to turn back. Every hallway looked the same. Every corner led only to more shadows, and the sound of footsteps trailing behind me never stopped. They were slow, deliberate, and always just out of sight, like something wanted me to know it was following but not let me see it. I tried to keep track of where I was going, but the museum shifted in impossible ways. Rooms appeared where they shouldn't have, staircases led to places that didn't exist the day before, and entire wings stretched longer than they should. It felt alive, constantly reshaping itself around me, leading me exactly where it wanted me. The silence grew heavier the further I went, until my own breathing was the only sound left. Even the footsteps that had followed me seemed to vanish, which somehow felt worse. I found myself standing in the grand hall again, though I didn't remember turning back toward it. The massive clock still loomed above the entrance, its hands frozen in the same position. I stared at it for a long time, realizing that time hadn't changed since the very first day I entered. It wasn't just broken, it was stuck in the exact moment I had walked in, as though the building itself had captured me in that second. My stomach twisted at the thought. The iron gates to the closed wing were open now. The chains that had bound them were gone, as if they had never been there. The gap yawned wide, swallowing light, beckoning me closer. I tried to resist, but my body moved against my will, each step pulling me closer to the threshold. The air grew colder the nearer I got, sharp and biting, like I was walking into a tomb. The sheets covering the exhibits inside stirred faintly, though there was no breeze. Each one bulged outward, the outlines beneath them shifting in unnatural shapes, as if whatever was hidden there was moving, stretching, waking up. I stepped past the gates, my skin crawling as the air grew heavy with the stench of damp stone and decay. The deeper I went, the more I realized the exhibits weren't statues or relics. They were shapes too human, too lifelike, standing frozen under the cloths. My chest tightened as I brushed past one, and for an instant, I swore I felt the cloth rise against me, like a hand brushing against my arm. I stumbled forward, refusing to look back. At the center of the wing stood a massive stone sarcophagus. Its lid was half slid open, exposing a crack of pitch-black emptiness within. My instincts screamed at me to turn and run, but my legs locked in place. I felt the pull of the coffin, as though the darkness inside it reached for me, clawing at my chest. My phone buzzed faintly in my pocket, but when I pulled it out to shine the light, the screen flickered and went black, leaving me in near-total darkness. The silence was unbearable, and then, slowly, it broke. I heard breathing. Not mine, something deeper, raspier, exhaling from within the sarcophagus. The stone lid shifted another inch with a grinding groan, as though something was pushing it aside from the inside. My skin went ice cold, and before I could move, a whisper filled the room. louder now, not faint like before. It wrapped around me, vibrating through my bones. "We've been waiting for you." The sheets around the room trembled violently, then collapsed to the floor all at once. Dozens of figures stood beneath them, some tall, some bent, their shapes warped and impossible. They didn't move closer, but I felt them watching me, surrounding me, leaving no way out. The lid of the sarcophagus slid completely off, crashing to the floor with a thunder that shook the room. From the darkness inside, something began to rise. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The figure that emerged wasn't like the others. It wasn't covered. It wasn't hidden. It was pale, impossibly tall, its face the same as the reflection I had seen in the glass. Hollow eyes, expressionless, a face carved from nothing but void. It stepped forward slowly, and with each movement the air grew colder until my breath turned to mist in front of me. The whisper filled my head again, though I could see its mouth wasn't moving. "You are ours now." My vision blurred and my body grew heavy, like every part of me was sinking into the floor. I staggered back, desperate to escape, but my foot hit something solid. When I looked down, my heart stopped. I was inside a glass display case, the same kind I had walked past 100 times before, only this one was shut tight around me. I pounded on the glass, but my fists made no sound. The pale figure leaned close, its hollow eyes peering into mine. A plaque appeared at the base of the case, its letters etched freshly into the metal. "New exhibit. Human specimen, donor unknown." And in that final moment, as the silence swallowed me whole, I understood I was no longer a visitor in the museum. I was part of it.